Good afternoon, teachers. We're going to take a second to go over the benchmark lesson plan analysis rubric as it relates to the paper that you're going to be working on. So if you remember when we talked about this, the paper should cover, as you see up here, the choices you made to develop your technology benchmark lesson, right? So you created this lesson, and the paper will be your explanation of how you made those decisions to include technology, and it should be aligned with what we've talked about in class. So let's look at the first one. So provides a relevant research-based rationale explaining how the technology used is appropriate to design and plan instruction that supports student learning. When I look at this, what I see, research-based rationale explaining how the technology is used is appropriate, I immediately think TPACK. So obviously at the beginning of your paper, you're going to have an introduction. That would be a great place for you to cite some kind of overarching research, some sort of broad research that just says, and you can find these, I think I pointed to one in the technology recently about mobile learning. But you want to point to, in that first paragraph, I would have just a quote, a citation that says, technology supports student learning when used appropriately, something along those lines. The next paragraph, though, I would talk about TPACK because that addresses, or that helps to explain the rationale for how the technology used is appropriate. You know, that could be a lot of other things also, right? That I'll touch on, you know, I'll introduce some other ones below, but that could be, you know, it's appropriate because it's free and it overcomes the barriers associated to technology. It's appropriate for, you know, other reasons as well. Okay, next item. Offers a relevant research-based rationale explaining how the technology is used or is appropriate to provide differentiated instruction. Okay, so a couple of things here. One that comes to mind is UDL, right? So how are we, and UDL tends to eschew this word differentiated. It kind of focuses more on, I'm just designing instruction to meet the needs of all learners. But we can still think of meeting the needs of all learners as differentiating. And how does it do that? I mean, an example of that would be using something like Flipgrid or using something like Padlet or using some technology that allows students to demonstrate learning in a different way, right? For example, Flipgrid allows them to record as opposed to having to write, or Padlet is multimodal, right? Padlet allows them to post images, to post videos, to record themselves, to, you know, just allow them to communicate understanding in a number of ways. Speaking of multimodal, if you introduce that, talking about Padlet or some other way, this would be a great place for you to segue or to introduce talking about 21st century literacies, right? Speaking of which, if they're doing any type of research, or if they're even writing, you could address 21st century literacies, right? If your students are doing anything that connects to those 21st century literacies, whether it's research or reading and writing, you know, and using technology and developing digital literacies, then you might want to touch on that in your paper, right? The next one just kind of outlines how many citations you're going to have, and I believe you're supposed to be over here in the 4 and 5. Now, if you do this right, I think that you're going to be above 4 and 5. You're going to be at 6+, because you don't want to make any claims in your paper like you've seen probably with your first technology project or in 600, where I say, according to who, or who said this, or provide a citation, right? So if you're making some type of claim in your paper about something that your use of technology or something that you're doing does, right? For example, increasing learning. Who says that? How do you know that, right? There should be something that we read, something that you read, an article along those lines. Now, with that said, I'm looking for articles that we've read in class. If I see, generally when I see somebody, and points are deducted because of this, because it speaks for itself, when I see somebody and they've got a bunch of articles that they've selected that are not related to our reading, it makes me think that this person has not done the reading. So I expect you to be citing research from articles that were assigned in class. Next item. Thoroughly explains how the lesson plan technology provides varied opportunities for all students to use appropriate technology to further their understanding, and that's through the 5 C's, right? Critical thinking, communication, or 4 C's. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. For some reason I thought it was 5. Critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. So this is a perfect place for you to talk about the ISTE standard, right? The ISTE standard talks about students using technology to support these things, right? Critical thinking, communication, collaboration, as well as some of the technologies that we're going to use, right? Also support these things, whether it's using a Jamboard or use it to communicate, whether it's using a Google document to collaborate. These are uses of technology that connect to that. And of course, if we're using technology to communicate, not only are we touching on these 4 C's, but we're also touching on 21st century literacies again. If we're talking about creativity, this may be an excellent spot. Creativity may be an excellent spot to talk about using technology to overcome the digital divide by having students use it as producers as opposed to consumers. Next one's pretty straightforward. This has to do with assessment. We read multiple articles on assessment. And we're not looking, if you go over here, we're not looking really at this stakeholder part, or I'm just more interested in that you're using technology to assess data. Generally, teachers are communicating through Infinite Campus. Finally, and surprisingly, this is one that's oftentimes not addressed. You want to talk about choices that you made to ensure that your use of technology in your lesson maintained a safe, secure, and equitable environment. So equitable, okay, this is a great place for you to talk about the digital divide, right? So I use technology, all the students have Chromebooks, and then I use technologies that were free so that everyone would have access to them, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. How did you ensure it was safe? How did you ensure it was secure? Talk about those. And this would be a great place when we look at ethical use. This would be a great place to talk about digital citizenship and the resources from ISTE that we saw about the various types of digital citizenship. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview of what I'm looking for. Hopefully you find this beneficial as you think about that. Don't forget to have a conclusion to your paper. Don't forget to have a cover page and a reference section. Don't forget to check APA, 12-point, double font. This is not a works cited page, it's a reference page. It's not MLA. Don't forget that you should have internal citations, right? Parenthetical documentation within your paper. And that's, be sure to review what the limit is, which I believe is 10 pages, not counting references. Or the cover page. I can't remember exactly how I specified that. Be sure to look over that. Let's see here. Here it is, I'm sorry. Lesson plan should not exceed 10 pages. The lesson plan analysis should not exceed 10 pages, 12-point font, double space, not counting the title page. Okay, so the reference pages do count, the title page does not. Okay? All right. If you have any questions, you can find me this weekend online.